Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. So today we're doing a wrap-up video, and I feel like I haven't done one in a really long time, or maybe it's more so the fact that I feel like I've read a lot of books in a short amount of time, and so I have a lot of books to update you guys on. I think I read 8 books in January, and I've already read like 2 or 3 books in February, so I feel like I've just read a lot lately, and there's a few reasons for that, but we won't go into that. But I have a lot of books to talk about today, so we're gonna try to do this as fast as we can, hopefully this video is not too long. If it is, grab a snack, grab some wine, grab some tea, whatever it is that you want to drink, and let's just relax and talk about books for a while. So I actually got a Kindle for Christmas this past year, and I was actually really against Kindles. I've always been a physical book person. Like, I prefer physical books over audio and everything. I just love the physical book in my hand. And so I was like, no, I don't want a Kindle because I just really like the physical book. But I love my Kindle, you guys. If you've ever been like a little bit hesitant on getting a Kindle, I highly recommend it because I've been able to read so many books that I wanted to read for a really long time, but I just never got around to reading them because I didn't want to buy them, or I was kind of waiting until I found like a good price on them, you know, like I just never got my hands on a physical copy. And so it's been really amazing, and I think it's been really good for my reading in general. So I highly recommend getting a Kindle. Like, even if you're a little hesitant on it like I was, like, it really does change your reading a lot, I feel like. So I'm going to talk about the first book, which is a book that I did read on my Kindle, and it was Verity by Colleen Hoover. And I have been wanting to read this book for so long, and I am so glad I finally read it because it was so good. So I've read one, well, before Verity, I read one Colleen Hoover book before, which was November 9, and I really liked it. Like, there was something about her writing that just really sucked me in, and there's just something about Colleen Hoover that I love, and I don't know what it is. I think it's her fast-paced writing style. There's just something about it that no matter what she writes about, I am drawn in fully. So it's basically about a woman who is a writer, and she's kind of in a rough place in life. Like, she's not making a lot of money in her job, and she's just kind of like a struggling author. Well, one day she gets this job from her agent, which is to basically finish a series that is written by Verity. And Verity is like this well-known author, writer, and she is writing this amazing series that everybody loves, but she was in a really bad accident and she can't finish her novel, so Lowen, I think that's her name, Lowen, has to go in and she has to finish up the series for her. And so she basically goes to Verity's home where her husband and their son live, and she basically has to go through all of her stuff, and in that process she finds a really messed up kind of transcript or draft of her memoir, or like, you know, autobiography, I guess, and it's really just kind of weird and messed up, and it just makes for a very interesting story. Now, this is a thriller, but the thing about Colleen Hoover's writing is she likes to take romance and mix it with other genres. So she'll take romance and mix it with paranormal, romance, mix it with thriller, romance and mix it with whatever else. And that's what I really love about her writing, is I got the thriller aspect of this book, but also the romance aspect of it, which made for such a good combination, and I really liked it. This book just kept you on the edge of your seat, and I was just so obsessed with it the entire time. Like, I read it, I think, in a couple of days. It is a little bit disturbing. I was actually quite surprised at how high the disturbance level was with this. If you are a mom and you have a hard time reading about like child abuse or anything like that, I highly recommend maybe being a little timid on this one, because the child abuse is very high in this, and I kind of felt a little bit like reading it at times. It's just it was a harder read than I was expecting it to be. It is a very disturbing kind of thriller, but I like a good disturbing thriller, so it was good for me. So the next book I also read on my Kindle, and Colleen Hoover is like who I read on my Kindle. Like, I just go through, I'm gonna go through her entire backlist and just read all of her books on my Kindle. But the next book I read was Layla, and I think that this is the most recent book she came out with, and I actually had no idea what to expect with this book at all. I had no idea what kind of book this was gonna be, but basically it's about this girl, Layla, and this actually takes place from the male's perspective, which I thought was really interesting because usually when I read romances, it's from the woman's perspective, but this was from the man's perspective. And it was really, I liked it. I really liked that aspect of it. But it's basically about these two people, Layla, and I can't remember what the guy's name is. It's him and her, and they end up meeting at a wedding, and they end up falling instantly in love. It's like one of those like really quick romances that really just blooms out of nowhere, and they just love each other so much, and they just get along so well, and it's like love at first sight type of thing. So they fall in love, and they have like this really passionate relationship. But then one day an accident happens with Layla, and she just starts acting very weird, very different. She's just not like her normal self, a lot of PTSD and anxiety. Her boyfriend can't figure out what's wrong with her, and he's trying to be extremely supportive and stuff like that, so he decides to take her on a trip to where they met, and then a lot of weird things start happening, and he's just trying to figure out like what's going on with his girlfriend Layla. And this book was so interesting, especially if you don't know where this book is going to go, and I think that's why I liked it so much, is because I wasn't expecting the route it was going to take. However, what I can say about this book that was a little bit different than Verity, and why I only gave it 4 stars, was because I predicted it. And I predicted it really early on, which was very surprising for me. I'm not saying that this book is predictable. I think I just got really lucky or unlucky, I guess, in predicting this. Like, for some reason, it clicked super early on. I'm like, this is what happens, and this is why it happens, and this is how it happens. And I just knew what was going to happen, and I was absolutely 100% correct. And I even saw like the red herrings. And so I think that that took away from my reading experience, because I wanted to get to the end, because I knew what was going to happen, and I was just like, okay, like, get to the point, like, I know this is gonna be the end. And so I think that that took away just a little bit from my reading experience. But at the same time, it was still super entertaining. Like, I just loved it so much, and there's something about Colleen Hoover's writing that just immerses me. Like, I can picture everything so well. And it's crazy because Colleen Hoover is not that descriptive of a writer, which I'm going to go into in a second in another book that I'm going to talk about, and kind of what I've realized a little bit about descriptive writers. But yeah, there's just something about Colleen Hoover's writing that is just so vivid in my mind. Like, this book, even though I only gave it 4 stars, it's always going to be one of those books that is so clear in my head. 4 out of 5 stars. It did get a little bit repetitive, I feel like, at times. Like, there were times where I was kind of like, the same kind of things kept happening, and I just was kind of ready for the plot to move forward a little bit, and that was another reason I took 1 star away, but it's definitely worth the read. I personally really enjoyed it. Okay, so next I read 2 books on my Kindle, and these were the Blake Crouch, I can't remember what the series is called, but he basically curated a bunch of authors to write kind of like short sci-fi stories. And I read Summer Frost by Blake Crouch, and I also read Emergency Skin by N.K. Jemisin. I think there's like 4 or 5 more that I need to read. But Summer Frost is what I read first. That one was by Blake Crouch. And as you guys know, Blake Crouch is one of my favorite authors ever. I absolutely love him. His book was 74 pages. It was the longest book out of all of the books in this little like series of short stories. And this was about kind of like a, how do I explain this? This character in this video game, they're trying to make it very sentient in a way. And so what they're trying to do is like create a body so they can put this artificial intelligence from this video game into that body. So the main character in this story becomes very attached to this artificial intelligence, and they start to create like this bond. But the thing about this artificial intelligence is it's not a human, and so it doesn't have the same morals and the same values as like a human would. And so it kind of gets weird and gray and discombobulated, and like their relationship and kind of what ends up happening becomes complicated, I guess I should say. Now, this actually reminds me a ton of Illuminae. It kind of has the same topics that are covered in it when it comes to the artificial intelligence and like what happens when it becomes sentient, and like the logical aspect of like a computer versus the emotional aspects of a human. Like, it's that weird, you know, mix of the two, and it just reminds me a lot of Illuminae, which was really good because I love that aspect of Illuminae. So if you really liked the human computer relationship in Illuminae, then I think you're going to really like this book as well, because it's very, very similar. Now, the thing I love about Blake Crouch is he always just leaves you pondering, and that's why I really like his books in general. He just leaves you thinking about things and questioning things, and that's why he makes such a great sci-fi writer, because he doesn't just give you things. He keeps the questions open for you to explore on your own, and he always does that in his books. If you have not read a Blake Crouch novel yet, I highly recommend it, because that's why I love him as a sci-fi writer, and I cannot wait until he comes out with more books. Like, he's just so good. So, loved it so much. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. I didn't give it 5 because I had to kind of think about, okay, did I like this as much as Dark Matter or Recursion? And I think because those books were longer, I just kind of fell more in love with them, and because this was a shorter story, I didn't have that same feel necessarily as I did with like a longer book, but 4 stars is still really good. Still means I really liked it, so great book. The next one was N.K. Jemisin's Emergency Skin. When I was looking up some, you know, videos about these short stories when I was done reading them, I realized I was in the unpopular opinion for The Emergency Skin by N.K. Jemisin. A lot of people were saying that this was the best one out of the entire series, and I'm over here like, what? Like, it was a 2. It was a 2-star for me. Now, I have a few reasons for this, and if you want to go deeper, I don't want to get like too like deep or controversial or anything like that here, but you can go look at some of the reviews on Goodreads and kind of read some of the 1 stars versus some of the 5 stars, and you can kind of understand why. This book was basically about a utopian world, and these people, right, like Earth has this group of people, all men, that move to another planet because they want to create a utopian society on this other planet. And so they basically leave Earth and they create their so-called utopian society, but it ends up not being utopian, and Earth ends up turning utopian because all of these men left and tried to start their own place. One man came back to collect some, you know, things that he needed from Earth. He started to realize that his new world on the other planet was actually not the best way to live life, and then when he came back to Earth, it was actually the true utopian society. And it was really interesting. I thought that her concept was interesting, and I think that she could have executed this so much better, and I'm going to explain why. Because I think the idea was good, but here's the issue. This book was pushing an agenda, basically. And here's the thing, is you can agree with a lot of the things that she was saying in the book, but it doesn't take away from the fact that she was pushing an agenda so hard that she almost oversimplified it, and she didn't include any nuance because she wanted to make her point so badly that she just completely ignored the nuances that would happen in this type of story. Like, here's the thing about this book, is it felt like propaganda, and it was very much pandering to a certain audience and a certain agenda, and I cannot stand propaganda, especially propagandic media, when it's supposed to be something that you enjoy, but what you feel like when you're reading it is that you're being lectured, or like you're getting something pushed on you to where it's so unrealistic and so unnuanced that you're like, please. The world doesn't work this way. As much as it seems like it would be great if it did, it just doesn't. And you didn't touch on topics that would be so important and such an interesting element to add to this story. You just wanted to make a point and you wanted to feed it to us, right? Or shove it down our throats, essentially. So here's the important thing about sci-fi, and this is the reason why I like sci-fi and why I prefer Blake Crouch's sci-fi over this N.K. Jemisin piece that she wrote. Blake Crouch is really good at posing questions and allows you as a reader to question and ponder on those questions on your own. This work that N.K. Jemisin wrote was more like handing you answers. But it didn't really seem fair because we didn't get to dive deeper into the deeper questions that something like this would pose. It was just more like, here's the answers, take it, and that's it. So the next book that I read was Dead Mountain, The Untold True Story of the Dyatlov Pass Incident, and this was by Donnie Ikar, I think is how you pronounce his name, Donnie Ikar. Now, I don't know if you guys have heard about the Dyatlov Pass incident, but it is so fascinating. Stephanie Sue, I don't know if you guys are subscribed to her. If you aren't, you should. She just did a video about the Dyatlov Pass incident, and basically it's about these this Russian group of hikers. There was like, I don't know, 7 men and like 2 women. They went on a hike over Dead Mountain, and what ended up happening is they pitched their tent and they ended up going missing, and nobody knew what happened to them, and they went and they searched for them, and so many weird things happened when they found the campsite and all the hikers' bodies. They were found, like, the tent was split open, the hikers didn't have shoes on, and they were like super far away from camp. One person had their like tongue ripped out or eaten out, and they didn't have the proper clothing on. What it looked like was they were right in the middle of eating dinner. Like, everything was like perfectly in place. Their shoes were all lined up nicely, and it looked like they either were attacked or something happened, and they could not for the life of them figure out what happened to these people. It's like this unsolved mystery. They don't know how it happened, what happened, or anything like that. But the thing about this book that was really interesting is that it goes into all the different possibilities that could have happened to them, but in the end it kind of talks about the most logical explanation for what happened, which I'm not going to tell you guys, because if you guys want to go look into it or read this book, you totally can. I don't want to like spoil the whole thing for you guys, but it talks about what they think happened to them and why their bodies were found the way that they were found, and it's a very fascinating book, and I love stuff like this. It's like kind of like that unsolved mystery, true crime type of thing, but this is just this was just really, really interesting, and it made me do so much more research on this. Like, I was on my computer just like looking up all types of articles and pictures and all that kind of stuff. The only reason I gave this 4 stars is because I'm not somebody that really cares about dumb details, and what this author did is that he went into what the hikers did before their excursion. So it was like, first they went to a hotel, and then they went on a bus, and this is Igor, and then it gives all of Igor's past, and then there's this person, and then it gives all this person's past. Like, I don't care really that much about all of that detail. Like, I just want to go into them actually hiking and what happened and what their theories are and all of that kind of stuff. So that's the only reason why I gave it 4 stars, is because there was a little bit too much of that like information, and I just got a little bit bored with that stuff. But once you get into the whole past incident and like how they found them and like all their theories and stuff, like, fascinating. I love it so much. It's so interesting. So the next book I read was actually a physical book. I finally have a physical book. This is Perfect Little Children by Sophie Hannah. Now, I talked about this in my top 10 books I want to read in 2021, and this was the first one I got to, and I was really excited about this because it sounded so interesting. Basically, it's about this girl, or this woman, who had a friend, and they were super, super close, and they had a falling out. And so what ended up happening was the main character in the story ends up driving by her old ex-friend's house, and she sees her kids with her. But the weird thing is her kids didn't age. They were the same age that they were when they were friends 10 years ago. And she's like, what the heck? Like, how is that even possible? So this book basically follows her story on trying to figure out why this is and why her kids are the same age and all of that kind of stuff. And it just fascinated me from that synopsis. I was like, how and where is this book gonna go? Like, I don't know. So I gave this book 3 stars. This book wasn't bad, but it wasn't like phenomenal. I was kind of hoping for maybe like a different outcome. I was kind of thinking it was gonna go maybe a different route genre-wise, but I think I was a little bit disappointed in kind of what the explanation was, I think, a little bit. It wasn't bad. Like, it was still good, it was still interesting, but it wasn't what I was expecting, I think, which it's never good to make expectations, but I think for me, I just wasn't as excited about the ending as I think I wanted to be. And the other downside too is that this book got really long and really repetitive. I think this book could have been edited down a lot. A lot of things kept happening over and over and over again, and a lot of the same conversations kept happening. Like, this chick in this book talks to her daughter and her husband over and over and over about the same things. Like, I feel like she just kept having the same dialogue. And I was like, didn't you guys already talk about this? Like, and because of that, it got really long and really drawn out. Like I said, it could have been cut way short. Now I'm going to talk about the whole description thing that I was talking about early on and why I like Colleen Hoover's writing. The way that this author writes description is so weird to me, and I realized after reading this book how much I hate it and how much I prefer a certain describing style. So Colleen Hoover, when she writes descriptions, she does it very vaguely, but she does it in a way where you can picture the thing in your head, right? Like, she'll say, it was a beachfront home with a white picket fence around it and painted blue, or something like that. It's very basic, but you can kind of picture a beachfront home with a white picket fence and all that kind of stuff. Like, it's just enough description to where you can really get that image in your head. With her, she went into so much detail about everything that I was like, oh my god, like, I can't picture this because it's so specific. Like, she was describing a house, and it was like literally an entire paragraph of what this house looked like. Like, this side was black and this side was white, and then it had a protrusion out the middle with a little circle window, and then the top was like a red color, and then it had this on it, and then it had this on it, and then there was like a little bench, and then there was this. And it got to the point where I was like, I can't even picture this home because it's so specific that I feel like I'm getting it wrong. And there were so many times that she would describe things for an entire paragraph, and I would just skim it because I was like, I don't need all this information, especially when it started getting to the end where I just wanted to like know what was going on. She would spend so much time describing, and I'm like, just get to the point. Like, I need to know what's going on in this book. Like, I don't need you to describe every single paint color this house has on it, you know what I mean? So this book was okay. I'm not gonna say it was bad. If you think the synopsis sounds interesting, I definitely would give it a try. There was just definitely some writing elements that I wasn't a huge fan of with this, and it definitely could have been cut way down in my opinion, but yeah, 3 stars, not the best, but not the worst either. So the next book I read was a guilty pleasure read. Now, I'm not gonna sit here and tell you guys that this is like a literary masterpiece, because it's definitely not a literary masterpiece. This had so many spelling mistakes and grammar mistakes, and it was so like just over the top, but like in a good way. Like, sometimes we just need that over-the-top romance that just like scratches a guilty pleasure itch, you know? And that was A Touch of Darkness by Scarlett St. Clair. This is a Hades and Persephone retelling, and it's literally Hades and Persephone. It's not like characters that are similar to Hades and Persephone, it actually is the gods. Now what is interesting about this book is it's actually in modern times, and the gods coexist with humans. So you could just be minding your own business and you could be like hanging out with a god or like a nymph. And these gods are kind of like celebrities in a way, and they are very rich, they own a lot of clubs and stuff like that, and the main character, Persephone, is trying to hide the fact that she is a god, and she ends up going to Hades' club, and she ends up making a deal with Hades. Obviously we all know the story, and she has to spend time in the underworld. This was actually really satisfying. Like if you're looking for a romance that just satisfies that itch, especially if you like Hades and Persephone stories in general, this will give it to you. It just has that really just like over-the-top romancy vibe, which I was really wanting. Like I just wanted that. Something that was simple, but just pure romance. That is literally what this is. And it's also extremely smutty. So if you're looking for a smutty book, this is gonna be it for you. The only thing I didn't like about this book is Persephone really irritated me. She was so judgmental, and I felt like she had this preconceived idea of who Hades was, and it didn't matter how good Hades treated Persephone, she was still like really mean to him kind of, and like skeptical of him and judgmental of him, and I'm like, you have no right to be judgmental of Hades. He's done nothing to you other than kind of, you know, make a deal with you, which I can understand, but other than that, he's never been mean to you. She also jumped to a lot of conclusions. Like I felt like, you know, he would do something or he would say something that wasn't really anything weird or bad. He would just say something to her, and then all of a sudden she would jump to a conclusion that he meant that because of this, and he said that because of this, he did that because of this, and I'm mad at him now because he blah blah blah, and it would just like trail off into some big thing like that wasn't even true, and that kept happening, and I'm like, what the heck? Like I felt like she was so like unhealthy mentally, and she just kept jumping to these random conclusions, and I can't stand that. Like, at all. This book has a lot of lack of communication, and I hate that, but I hate jumping to conclusions just as much as I hate lack of communication, because I feel like it's just irritating. It's so frustrating, and I literally hate those two things so much, and there was a lot of that in this book, but I knew that eventually, you know, it would all come together at the end and stuff like that, so it wasn't that irritating because I kind of knew the ending already, but it's still frustrating. That was my opinion. I don't know, maybe some people don't feel the same way, but that's kind of how I felt. Other than that though, I didn't take this book too seriously. This is one of those books that you just read for fun, and who cares if there's, you know, plot holes, who cares if it's not completely logical. Like I wasn't reading this for like literary merit or anything. I was just reading it for fun. These types of books I feel like you can't overthink, because if you overthink these types of things too much, you're just not gonna have fun reading. Some books don't need to be overthought, you know? And I read for fun, and so, you know, some books I'm just like, whatever. Like, I don't really care if this book is just over the top and weird. Like, I still liked it. It was still entertaining for what I needed at the time. You know what I mean? So the next book was Heartbones by Colleen Hoover, and again, there's something about her writing that just sucks me in. And the thing about this book is it actually lacked plot. There was not a lot of plot in this book at all, and I'm like, why am I still so invested, even though there's like no plot? I don't know. It's just something about her writing style that she does it to me every time. But this is basically about a very poor girl, and her name is Bea, and she is living in like a trailer park. Her mom is a druggie, and she comes home from work one day and her mom is dead on the couch from an overdose. And so she ends up having to call her absent father, who is now rich, and she moves in with him on this beachfront property, and she ends up meeting this guy and her new half-sister and her boyfriend, and they kind of just have a summer together, and a romance ensues, and that's basically like the story. This book actually talks a lot about like class and wealth differences and how those can kind of play into a relationship, and it's very interesting. I thought she did a really good job with that actually, and I think it was interesting because it really showed how important it is to not be judgmental, and how just because you have a lot of money doesn't mean that you're happy, and you know, you can't judge people's happiness or brokenness on the amount of money that they have, and I thought that that was a really interesting concept that she covered in this. But the only reason why I didn't give this book 4 or 5 stars, I gave it 3 stars, was because it lacked plot. Like I said, there was not a lot of plot. The main thing in the story was the romance. That was it. There was no real plot, like real conflict, I feel like, that was happening. I mean, at the end there definitely was, and kind of where the story goes, but for like most of the story, it's just like the meeting and falling in love part of it. Like that's about it really. And the other thing too is for some reason I just couldn't feel the connection between the two characters, which was weird because I usually do with Colleen Hoover, but with this couple I just was not feeling the connection. I wasn't feeling that really strong draw with them where I was like, oh, I want them to end up together. Like I really hope they end up together. I just personally didn't feel that with them. And so that's why I gave it 3 stars. Like I feel like I could have had a stronger connection and I feel like the plot could have been a little bit better. But it wasn't a bad book. Like I said, if you like Colleen Hoover, try this book because you'll probably still like it. I think I said in my review on Goodreads that she could write about a brick wall and I would still find it entertaining. I don't know. Doesn't make sense to me, but 3 stars for Heartbones. So the next book I read was a graphic novel, The Handmaid's Tale. I'm not going to talk too much about this because I think most of us know what The Handmaid's Tale is about. If you don't, I highly recommend maybe watching the show or reading the real book or reading this graphic novel. I actually haven't watched the show or watched the show or read the real book. This was the first experience I had with The Handmaid's Tale, was this graphic novel. And it made me actually want to read the book, which is crazy because I didn't really have a desire to read it before, but when I saw this at my library, I was like, oh, maybe I'll read it. And now I'm really interested in the story because I think it's fascinating. Now, if you don't know anything about The Handmaid's Tale, it's basically about like a dystopian world where women are used for their uterus, basically. And it's a very like male-controlled world where women are basically just your like fertile servant, I guess. And it's kind of scary. Like it's creepy and scary in like this really weird way. There's just something so disturbing and uncomfortable about the world that this, you know, takes place in. It just makes you feel really uncomfortable. And but yeah, I gave it 4 stars, and the only reason I gave it 4 stars is because I know that I would like the book better because it would just have more detail. There was a few times I got confused because there wasn't enough details because it is a graphic novel, and so I feel like if I would have read the book I probably would have given it 5. Now the last book that I read was Good Morning Monster by, what's her name, Catherine Gildiner. This book was on my top 10 books I want to read for 2021. Oh my gosh, you guys, this book was so good. This might be one of my favorite books of the year for sure. I gave this book 5 stars. It's on my Goodreads favorites list. It was phenomenal. Now, this book, the reason why this book was so good is this is what I wanted when I read Oliver Sacks. What you got was what therapy looks like from a psychologist's perspective, which I think is so interesting because I think if you've ever been in therapy, you're always curious like what it looks like from the therapist's perspective. And this gave you a look into that. But not only that, she talked about the different routes that she took with each patient that she had, like why she chose this type of therapy and why she decided to do this or why she didn't decide to say this and why it was really important that she didn't touch on that quite yet. Like you could really see the different types of psychology that she used on each patient. But she also talked a lot about her mistakes that she made. And I thought that was so interesting and so authentic and genuine of her to do because it made me realize that she knew she wasn't perfect. She knew she made huge mistakes in her career and she was willing to talk about those. Like, this is where I made a mistake. I should not have said that. I should not have done this. In this specific case, I had a boundary that I personally crossed with a patient, and she was willing to admit these mistakes because nobody's perfect. And I really liked that as well because it showed that she was humble and she was able to kind of explain her own faults. And I think that's what made this book so good, is because I hate when people put themselves on a pedestal, like they know all. She clearly was like, I didn't know all and I had to grow and learn a lot in this career. So that was really good. But not only that, these stories, you guys, were so amazing. Like, I love memoirs that talk about hardships and people that have had hard childhoods. It's just, and then they overcome them. Like, there's something about that I find so inspirational. Like, these people, she describes them as heroes, and they truly are heroes. Like, they went through some of the most hard, difficult, traumatic childhoods I think I've ever read about. The fact that they were able to overcome them through therapy and like just the way that they transformed was incredible. And these people were so strong and they persevered through things, and like the decisions that they made were just beautiful. Like, I couldn't get over how inspirational these people were. And it really, this book felt not only like a memoir, not only like a biography, not only like a, you know, nonfiction, just interesting story. It also felt like a self-help book in a way because you were able to kind of look at your own life and people in your life, and you're able to feel empathy, and it was an amazing book to read, you guys. I'm telling you, it was so good. There's one that kind of goes into this woman who had an extremely narcissistic mother. It also goes into this man. I thought his story was so fascinating. His name was Danny, and he was an Indigenous man in Canada. And his story is basically him being taken from, basically kidnapped from his family, who was a very healthy, supportive, like Indigenous Native family. He was kidnapped from his family and put into a residential school, which if you guys know anything about that, it's horrific. And basically they just put him in this school and they abuse them. They literally beat the Native Indigenous culture out of them. They had a lot of sexual abuse happen to them. They were beat, they were tortured, they were, every possible bad thing that could happen at these residential schools happened. And they basically just wanted to rid Canada of the Indigenous people, and they took all the kids out of the homes to do this and basically make them white. And it's his story of getting out of that residential school. Now I feel so much more educated in that history, and the thing that I loved about his story is he refused to drink, he refused to do drugs, but the way he coped was he just shut off all of his emotions. He did not want to feel any emotions, and that included happiness. So he was like super, super numb. And the interesting thing about this story and why I thought it was so great was because the therapist, Catherine, talks about how she knew she couldn't just use Western psychology on him, because that was the issue from the beginning. She needed to find a way to include his Indigenous spiritual kind of healing. And so she searched out an Indigenous healer from Harvard, and he came in and kind of helped him. She pushed him to go to some Indigenous meetings and stuff like that, and in the process he learned his language again, and he learned how to do healing practices from his culture. She knew as a white therapist that she could only do so much, but she could not do exactly what he needed, and so she, you know, pushed him to do those other things. And the other really interesting thing I found about this book was how important discussing intergenerational abuse and intergenerational trauma is. Like, a lot of these kids or these people were abused as kids, but one thing that ended up coming out a lot of times is that not only were they abused, but their parents were abused and neglected. And so because they didn't know how to be parents, because they weren't parented either and they were abused, they didn't know how to parent their own kids. And it really, I think, puts into perspective how important it is to not necessarily forgive, because I'm not saying that abuse should be forgiven or that it's not something that you need to deal with in life, but I think it puts into perspective the importance of understanding maybe your parents or your abuser and why maybe it happened. You can almost sympathize with them because what happened to you also happened with them. And I think that that's really important to put into perspective for anybody, like anybody. Even if it doesn't seem like, you know, you were abused or your parents were abused, like there's little things that may have happened in their life that may have change the way that they parented you. Does that make sense? So it makes you a little bit more empathetic to your parents or whoever it may be that you're struggling with, or any deep trauma that you might be experiencing. So I thought that that was really interesting as well. So I could talk about this book all day, you guys, seriously, all day. Like, there were so many amazing things about this book. Like, I can't even like touch on it all. Like, I could make an entire video about this book. This would be a great book for a book club. One thing I want to say about it though is trigger warnings to the max. Like, if you have a trigger warning, it's probably in this book. This did feel like a self-help book. There was an element to this book when I got done reading it where I felt a little bit more at peace with certain areas in my life and the way that I view myself, or how I view my actions, or how I viewed just people in my life and stuff like that. There's an element of peace that kind of comes over you with certain things, and I think anybody who reads this would feel the same, to be honest. So anyways, guys, this video was so long, oh my god. Like, I hope that you guys didn't get bored. I had a ton of books to cover and I wanted to talk a lot about them clearly, but I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Sorry it was so long, but I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I will talk to you guys in my next video. Bye!